So I'm going to call the April 1st, 2025 Charter Revision Commission meeting to order. If you could all rise and be patient with me to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Stand up in these chairs.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda is always public audience. We ask the public to state your name, your address, limit your comments to the items that are on the agenda for this evening. And it's approximately 3 minutes. Franklin's got the timer. So is there anybody in the public that would like to speak this evening? Lori? Okay.
Hi, I'm Lori Boyko from 15 Oakhurst Road, and I have half of this written. This country's form of government was very uniquely and carefully created to be comprised of the people, the electors, to represent those electors. It was specifically designed that way to give everyone equal input and participation, rather than being ruled from the top down or by special interests and financial influence. In order for government representing the people to work effectively, the majority of the people need to be able to make informed decisions. A representative government of informed residents needs to be completely transparent and accountable. With the vast number of boards, commissions, committees, and subcommittees we have, many of which are appointed, not elected, we have neither transparency nor accountability. No resident can possibly keep up with the sheer volume of meetings and minutes of those meetings that take place in any given week or month. Very key decisions are made by tiny groups of people who were not elected by us in small meetings at obscure times, sometimes 8:30 in the morning, that most in town don't even know are happening. Some of those meetings directly impact large portions of our budget, like the Board of Ed Curriculum Committee, for example. While major boards, like the full Board of Ed, don't really even meet year-round when there is work to be done. Without going line by line right now, I want you all to know that I've attended many of these meetings, even the tiny ones, and most, if not all, committees should be made into non-governmental clubs in town and taken off of the government roster, focusing on the larger boards and commissions that people can pay attention to, because right now, those have turned more into presentations than meetings at some of the big ones. So I think we need to slim it way down and focus our attention on the key governmental functions and let the other committees mostly and subcommittees turn into clubs of their special interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in the public audience that would like to speak this evening? Okay, well, thank you very much. So the public is aware. Every public comment that we receive, either presented at the meetings or submitted to our email address, is on the website. Franklin puts them, there's a special tab for all the public comments, so they are all in record. We did receive another item via email, a public comment from the chair of the Performing Arts Center regarding the Arts Council. Jeff Dornenberg submitted that yesterday. I think we received it. Full disclosure, I am also on the board, so I just want to disclose of the PAC, so I just want to put that out there. So we've received that. That will be in public record as well, and we can discuss that later. Next item on our agenda is we've invited the town manager, Mark Nelson, here to speak to us, and Tom Fitzgerald's here as well as the deputy town manager. And I'm sure you've watched some of our meetings, so this is just a back and forth discussion, so we want to hear from you. Your thoughts on the role of town manager in the charter and other things that you'd like to see us to consider changing or recommending for a change.
Thank you very much, Chair. And before I get started, for those who haven't met, my deputy is with us here, Tom Fitzgerald, as the Chair mentioned, and you all know Franklin, our management specialist in our office. So it's the three of us in your town manager's office, so you've got all of us here tonight. I have some prepared remarks, and then I'm looking forward to, if it's acceptable to the Chair, back and forth, certainly looking forward to having a dialogue and maybe having the opportunity to answer some of your specific questions. I did get a chance to watch just a couple of the meetings and made a couple of notes of issues that I think would be of concern that we can get to after the remarks, which I think Franklin has handed out to everybody. So I'll try to go through these quickly. Thank you, Chair Barnett and members of the Commission. I appreciate your extending an invitation to me to provide what I hope you will find is a useful background and context for the important work the Commission has before it. I offer these prepared remarks and submit them for the written record, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the Commission on these or other aspects of the work. And I'll just add how happy I am to be Simsbury's town manager and grateful to those on the prior board that appointed me unanimously to what is a 3-year contract, just wrapping up the first year. And I want to thank the public watching at home as well. It's really the job of a lifetime, I must say. This is the first charter revision undertaken since 2017's charter change, which saw the town move to a town manager form of government. Threshold work for the Commission, therefore, necessarily involves taking a look at how that's working, whether elements of the current charter should be adjusted to improve efficiencies and more clearly define roles and responsibilities, or indeed whether the town should abandon it completely and roll back the hands of time, so to speak. Changes to the form of government are the most drastic and all-encompassing of charter changes. Long-standing practices and protocols are likely to shift or disappear altogether. Understanding that temporary turbulence after a form of government change is normal and therefore need not be overblown, the work of this Commission may turn to reviewing some specific areas of town government which can be made more efficient, as well as to areas within the Charter where we might actually be a little proactive, realizing that our next opportunity to change it may not be until 2031. I have experienced changes to the form of government in 2 other communities. One, switching from a so-called weak mayor council manager to a strong mayor council, and one switching from a city manager council, where the manager is appointed by the council and serves at the pleasure of the council, to a city administrator council mayor form of government, where the city administrator is appointed by and serves at the pleasure of the mayor solely. In each case, the following charter revision, the one after that, necessitated some fine-tuning. And in both cases, the change in form of government survives to this day. It's working as intended, and the turbulence that I referenced has subsided. In my opinion and experience, it always seems to take one additional cycle of charter revision after a change in the form of government for the best parts of the intended outcomes to take hold in the community. And I think that's where we are today, 7 years later, spending some time looking at the change that led us to the town manager form of government and whether it needs to be tweaked. The result of the last charter change here in Simsbury is somewhat of a hybrid model among town manager systems. We established this form of government, but we largely left intact the remnants of the old. Where previously a committee, board, or subcommittee was necessary to give authority to most decisions, whether they be policy or administrative, today the intersection of authority is sometimes murky, where 36 boards and committees exist, even when the subject matter is quite clearly administrative. Comments made by the first selectman to the Commission speak to this murkiness as well, and suggest that the Commission more clearly define the respective roles. I'm not sure a municipal charter is really the right vehicle, and in fact I can't think of one, to predict every interaction or area of governance which could be said to touch on both policy and administration, and therefore delineate specific authority based on a set of hard and fast rules. In my view, the lack of clarity that has been referenced a number of times before the Commission is merely the result of the current charter not having sufficiently removed text from the former charter that predates the change in form of government. And I'd like to give you one example of that. And there are a number of them. I didn't pick this one because it's the most important, but I'm going to share with you some information about the Personnel Subcommittee of the Board of Selectmen and refer you to Charter's Section 402 and 411. A remnant of the former structure of our local government, the Personnel Subcommittee was a mechanism for 3 of 6 members of the Board of Selectmen to be intimately engaged in the day-to-day administrative oversight of the human resource function. As it remains today, the subcommittee is chaired by the first selectman. Provisions in the current charter give it and the Board of Selectmen authority over the language and specifics of each employee job description, as well as authority over wage scales and other personnel-related matters, which typically are the purview of the chief executive officer, where that role is different from the chief elected officer or strong mayor. The Board of Selectmen's authority as the chief appropriating body and its role as the approver of all collective bargaining agreements negotiated between management and labor give it adequate oversight over the town's management of its human resources. Those powers are inherent in the Board of Selectmen, and a personnel subcommittee may no longer be necessary. More importantly, in my view, its survival seems to support the view that even in a town manager form of government, the Board of Selectmen retains authority over administrative matters such as personnel. Times, our form of government, and Town Hall itself have all changed significantly since the subcommittee was first envisioned. The Board of Selectmen tacitly agreed when it recognized the need to establish the new Department of Human Resources in 2024 and approved shifting the personnel functions out of my office and into the new position, into the new Department of Human Resources. The Board of Selectmen, with approval of the Board of Finance and the voters, also created the Human Resources Director, who now leads that department. As a result of these legislative changes, I agree with comments presented by Selectman Beal to the Commission with respect to the need to amend Charter Section 502, Section C, to indicate that the town now has a Human Resources Department and a Director of Human Resources. I'd like to turn now, if I may, to just 3 quick areas that I'd like to call to the Commission's attention. Again, relatively minor in their own right, but worthy of a little discussion. First, our annual budget referendum section of the Charter, which I can refer you to as Section 406, where we can emphasize and build upon current levels of public engagement around our annual budget approval process. We should. The Commission might consider an amendment to this section of the Charter to add minimum voter turnout thresholds for budget approval. The reason behind this suggestion is that the recommendations of this Commission, if approved by the Board of Selectmen, will themselves go to referendum. And this is a very important question to ask our voters. Should the town's budget, once approved by the Boards of Selectmen, Education, and Finance, fail when voter turnout at the referendum is very small? Our neighboring town, Avon, has this provision in their charter. Quote, if the number of persons voting at any referendum conducted pursuant to this charter shall be less than 9% of the electors of the municipality, as determined by the last completed active registry list, the budget voted upon shall be deemed approved, notwithstanding that a majority of the votes cast shall be for rejection of the budget. And we're quoting the Avon Town Charter. Setting a minimum for voter turnout in no way erodes the democratic process. Quite the contrary. It recognizes that even when an individual exercises their right not to vote, the town still needs a budget, still must pay its bonded debts, and still must continue to provide municipal services. I'll defer the rest of that section for you to read at your leisure. It's just some data on voter turnouts at the referendum for your interest if you'd like to get into the data. Second, our current grant application process could be streamlined in the Charter. This one is a really interesting one to staff, and I've been asked to bring it up to the Commission, and I personally agree with this. I'll paraphrase this in the interest of time, but the current Charter requires that we go to the Board of Selectmen 3 times on every grant. we're required to go to the Board of Selectmen for approval to apply for the grant. And then we need to go to accept the grant. And then we need to go to appropriate the grant. We've taken occasionally to trying to lump all those into one motion and just, when we go for approval to apply, also ask the board to approve acceptance if approved and approve appropriation if accepted. But that doesn't often go over well with the members of the board. Our recommended solution to this is that you leave with the Board of Selectmen the authority to accept and the authority to appropriate, which obviously is its primary duty as the appropriating body. But if it would behoove the commission to recommend that the town manager or my delegate be authorized to just apply for the grant in the outset, that would be helpful. We did have a case recently where I was asked, can we go ahead and apply for this? And the first Board of Selectmen meeting was after the deadline to get the grant. A member of the public had brought it to our attention, and we were facing a short deadline. I don't have the authority to submit the grant application as it stands now, and we might well have gotten that. So that's one thing that staff asked me to bring up that we think would be a relatively...
Mark, can I ask you for clarification?
Yeah, please.
So when a grant is applied for, who's the signer on the grant? The first selectman or the town manager?
The town manager is. Yeah.
Thank you.
And finally, just wrapping up my prepared remarks, I think we could do more to empower the Board of Selectmen in its role as the town's policy board. I've been really interested to see some of the dialogue, comments, and obviously I've had my own discussions with members of our elected groups and bodies. And the issue of the yin and yang, if you will, between the town manager's position and first selectman. And then let me just say, that's not about the individuals. It's about the positions and their relative roles in the organization, right? I have a terrific, I think, relationship with all of the people in our sphere, and so we're not referencing anyone individually. But that said, the confusion that exists that I referenced throughout my remarks tonight is really, it's a little ironic because there's also a lack of clarity between and amongst the boards themselves. And so I was faced with a situation very recently where approval of some capital non-recurring expenses, i.e. Budgetary authority, needed to go to the Board of Education, it needed to go to the Board of Selectmen, needed to go to the Board of Finance. We missed a piece of it, had to go back to the Board of Selectmen. Ultimately, it'll go to referendum as part of our budget process. It starts to get a little bit unwieldy, particularly when you're talking about a budget process that is now extended into its fourth month. So I haven't been here that long. I don't know how long historically the town leaders have wrestled with the annual budget. Typically, my experience is that municipalities want to spend 2 or maybe 3 months on the budget, maybe a little extra time on their capital planning because it's a multi-year plan. But when you get into 4 months or 4 months out of your 12, you're spending a good portion of the year. And it's not just my office, it's department heads, it's our friends and colleagues on the Board of Finance and the Boards of Education and so forth. So I think the commission, in all the comments that you've received, and certainly in this last one I'm making, can take a look at maybe empowering our Board of Selectmen to have a little bit more authority with respect to this, because they are, in my view anyway, the primary legislative body and policy board of the town. And I've been struck, I think, throughout the process with a little bit of the irony that the focus is on the relationship between the town manager and the first selectman. And yet so much of the Board of Selectmen's authority is diluted amongst the boards of finance and other boards and commissions. So this last recommendation is just a general one. And what we're saying is that where it's not prevented or prohibited by state law, where state law does not apply, and it's just the charter, that the commission consider elevating the Board of Selectmen relative to others, boards and commissions, whether they're elected or appointed, not my concern. But anytime you decentralize policy authority, you're not really going to get the best policy, in my view. It's going to take twice as long, or in some cases 3 times as long. There could be disagreement. And there's a lack of clarity, I think, in terms of which board is responsible for what. I want to end with one example that I was just reminded me tonight. Got our town attorney who can speak to this more. But in my prior role as the city administrator and mayor of the city of Poughkeepsie, we were involved in some pretty meaningful litigation coming from the development community. Litigation that could and did impact the grand list and taxes and assessed values for years to come. And it was development that was mired in conflict and multiple lawsuits. In that form of government, both the city administrator and the mayor were intimately involved with the corporation council working on the settlement of that case. Ultimately, while I was there, we settled 2 of them and moved major developments through. Those settlements involved changes to the development plan that would not have been possible if the vesting of the settlement authority was solely with the Planning Commission or the Zoning Commission. It's not in my written remarks, but I want to summarize it this way. My recommendation for your consideration is that any time there is significant litigation against the town, as certified by the town attorney, it should be brought to the Board of Selectmen for ratification. And I'll leave it to the attorneys in the room to figure out what that means. But and it's with all deference to our colleagues on the Zoning Commission, for example, and those parties that are named defendants, obviously. In my example in New York, the requirement is that you name the city and the planning board separately. So, for exactly that reason, that your town leaders are involved in the discussions about the settlement that affects the tax base and so much else. And, again, I defer to the lawyers on this because it's a legal issue. But it seemed to me, as I walked into the new position, and the town is facing litigation and did recently settle litigation, that in conversations with our first selectman, I was informed that not a part of this. And neither was the town manager. And I think that I would imagine the first selectman would agree. I think I read Wendy's written remarks in which she made a brief comment about whether the Board of Selectmen should be included in this. So I just want to emphasize that in closing, that I think that is very important because those are the types of decisions that can impact the town and its taxpayers for literally decades. And that's all I had, Chair, and thank you all very much for your time. I tried to be quick, and I'll happy to have a conversation on any issue in the charter or any issue at all. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to start with a question about your last comment.
Yeah.
So with regard to your recommendation that the board, if I'm understanding this correctly, the Board of Selectmen be the decision-making authority over other boards and commissions' decisions?
At least consulted, Chair.
Consulted? So does that include, so you mentioned Board of Finance and you mentioned Board of Education, Police Commission. Would that also include elected officials that are planning and zoning?
No, I think that planning and zoning I specifically don't mention. There, I think with respect to the litigation issue that I'm citing, the ability to settle development litigation that is primarily focusing on and within the purview of zoning, for example, rests with zoning and our council. And yet the mechanism by which it might be settled and the plan of development changed can be directly related to only things that are within the purview of the Board of Selectmen. For example, tax abatements, incentives, anything else. If and I'm just going to say hypothetically, our development goal is to incent mixed-use development as opposed to 700 units of residential, just hypothetically. The ability to get a desired outcome that even zoning would like could, in certain circumstances, require the buy-in and in fact, legislative action of the Board of Selectmen. And that's just one example. There are others. But I think that not having the Board of Selectmen and frankly the town manager in the room for some of those discussions and therefore having an opportunity to weigh in with our colleagues on zoning, that's a miss on our part. I think one of the things, and if I can just expand on this for a minute, when you decentralize government between 30 boards and commissions, some of which are, I'd say, the primary ones, and others are lesser boards and commissions. When you decentralize, you lose that agility and ability that sees it from the 100,000-foot view, that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and that's particularly important in settlement conversations with the big developers that this town has been beset with and can expect to continue to encounter over coming years. So I think there are examples of things where through a charter change we can ensure that we empower the Board of Selectmen, and I think that's my experience is that litigation is one of those. So Chris, I would want to see if they could be in the room or just be consulted, advice and consent, or I'd defer to the attorneys.
Yeah, so I guess my question, follow up with that is, in my own personal question is how consistent, like how informed are the board? So the Board of Selectmen may have goals, the town manager may have goals, and the residents have goals that they've expressed in the POCD, okay, of what's important to us as a community. So how do you reconcile, how familiar are the Board of Selectmen with the POCD and aligning their goals with what the taxpayers have expressed as their wishes when they participated in all the interviews and surveys and all this stuff to come up with a plan of development?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know from the year and a month or two that I've worked with this Board of Selectmen, they are extremely knowledgeable, particularly as it relates to the POCD, and in fact, I'd have to say all the policy documents of the town. I don't want to speak for them, but I would say my experience is they're extremely knowledgeable. They certainly have, I think, a wider view of things than might a more narrowly defined board like zoning or planning, and particularly in an environment where they're elected. People run for office for specific reasons, for specific interests. They could run for a position on a board specifically for that agenda. The Board of Selectmen has a broader purview as our policy board. I think for them not to be involved in some of the more important litigation decisions just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You're vesting that decision solely in zoning, for say, in my example. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, do they need to be involved prior to actually going to litigation? I mean, we get to the point, litigation is a big deal. So, if, and I'm not saying this is what I think, but do they need to be involved in the conversation prior to a development actually suing us?
I wouldn't deign to make that, because that would be a fundamental shift in the scheme and the balance of power between these boards. That's not my intent. But
okay.
But once zoning has, and again, being mindful of the fact that we may be in litigation currently, I'll just say that if a project is denied, properly denied, we're still going to get sued. And we're going to have those fees, and our attorneys are going to be defending that lawsuit, particularly today, could be for many years. So the issue is, should all options be explored to not just settle the litigation, but to get a development that is what the town wants? In other words, zoning under this example may not have its purview may be so limited that it can't actually negotiate with the developer. They see their role as approving or denying. It's black and white. It's not their goal to tell the developer. They're able to tell the developer, I want 200 units instead of 900 units, or things like that. But I think within the context of litigation, to not include your policy board is something I'd ask this commission to consider. We don't do ourselves any disservice by excluding the Board of Selectmen from those conversations. I think that's my point. Yeah.
Now, litigation is a discrete event, right?
Right.
And it may happen, it may not happen. So what's something that's ongoing that you believe the Board of Selectmen should be more involved in? or should be empowered to be more involved in?
Well, one of the things I'll cite, something I think is an admirable, I don't know how long it's been going on, maybe Bert would know, but we have an annual tri-board meeting, might even be two of them, where the Board of Finance, the Board of Education, and the Board of Selectmen convene together. And that tri-board meeting, I've been to two of them now, have been, I think, very useful, probably one of the most useful, bringing folks together from all three boards. I'm not aware that there's a Board of Selectmen, Planning Commission, Zoning, Tri-Board, or anything equivalent that would, by charter or even by ordinance, put those boards together. And I having worked in a number of communities, I just want to point out for the Commission's thought processes that, again, when you decentralize, you've really created silos. A word I hear all the time since I got here is purview. And I don't hear it just negatively, I also hear it positively, right? But the thinking is, well, that's not our purview, that's the Board of Ed's purview. Well, it's not the Board of Selectmen's job to approve CNR if CNR is being paid through the operating budget, but it is if it's paid through the capital budget. We just encountered that, right? It's a little nuance for those watching who are in the know. But the issue is that purview is one of the words that I hear very often. And the problem with it is if we're all in our respective silos being ultra respective of everybody's purview, we're missing opportunities for synergistic or strategic thinking that is necessary, particularly in the development world where you've got applications being submitted that are perhaps not what the residents and our taxpayers want to see.
Now, in terms of looking at the silos and the purviews, have you needed to consult the charter to figure out how to get them to work together? Has the charter helped you, or did you have to look somewhere else? The charter, I'm pretty familiar with the charter, but I have to say that I see it as restrictive to that type of strategic thinking. Again, because of the decentralization and because of the thinking, and I don't mean to be critical at all. It isn't a critical thought. It is people are volunteers. They are unpaid. In many cases, that they are subject matter experts. They're really good at what they do and what they know. And I think with that comes sometimes a sense that this is my purview. And that erodes or detracts from the ability to have cross-organizational dialogue. If I take all the boards out of it and I look at what I'm more experienced with department heads, if I looked at every department head individually and didn't meet with them as a whole and hear from all of them in this room sometimes, because so much of what they do at the department head level intersects with one another. I'm trying to make that point. I know I'm not doing it as well as I'd like to, but I'm trying to make that point with respect to our boards and commissions as well. The only example of that cross-collaboration that I can cite is the annual tri-board meeting between the three primary boards. I don't know of anything similar in the charter with respect to zoning, planning, and the Board of Selectmen. And I think too that if our objective, I'm not saying it should be, but if the Commission's objective is to make it clear that the Board of Selectmen is the main policy board, and I think that's where the first selectman and I agree, is that they are the policy board. There's some gray area about where policy and administration intersect is sometimes a gray area, and we work through that. But I think that the real harm to the town is the lack of cross-sector collaboration between the Board of Selectmen and others. And if we want to make clear that the Board of Selectmen is our primary policy and legislative board, there are a number of ways that the Commission could think about doing that. Now, do you think there's an opportunity, because they don't talk to each other, that a decision could be made that could not work with the remaining boards, or is there a way to funnel this up somehow? I think the charter could require something akin to the tri-board. Again, I defer to you and other experts that know more about this, but there certainly could be mechanisms built in by charter that assure this. I mean, if our intent is to continue to have so many boards and commissions each operating in their area, then where in the charter where do you take account for the fact that they need to work together? Do we just assume that they all work together? Let me be clear. The Board of Selectmen has a liaison system where the Board of Selectmen pick a liaison, and the liaison goes to those meetings and reports back and so forth. But that reporting is not an opportunity for real engagement, I think, and that's my point.
Jeff, you wanted to say something?
Okay.
Yes.
So the struggle is with collaboration.
Correct.
Right. And that's one thing, and we can address that. I guess what I'm struggling with, though, is in the comments, though, and even litigation is I wholeheartedly, litigation should be tied to worse. Don't take this. That's kind of an easy example, right? But what you're suggesting here, if I'm reading this correctly, is almost turning all the boards into subcommittees or sub-boards of the Board of Selectmen. That's the way it seems to read to me.
Not planning and zoning.
So everything but planning and zoning essentially would be a line.
I didn't opine. I didn't opine, Jeff, on everything. I gave a couple of examples, the Board of Finance and the Police Commission, just as examples. This commission and others more knowledgeable than I could look at all of them. I know a lot of the work you're doing is to look at all of the various boards and commissions and what their roles are. Obviously, not the Board of Education, which is state mandated. So.
No, thank you. That's just again, if it's collaboration, that's one thing. I think we can handle that. This just seems to be a much bigger the way I'm reading it, but maybe I'm reading it.
No, I think you're reading it correctly. I'm just providing one method by which the commission might seek to clarify that the Board of Selectmen is the primary goal. And whether you may not want to do that, but where from my view as town manager, it isn't clear that the Board of Selectmen is the chief policy maker because, for example, unlike in West Hartford, they don't pass zoning and other things, right? So what the Board of Selectmen does here in Simsbury is relatively constrained in terms of their legislative powers vis-a-vis what other communities do. So,
Bert, you wanna?
Yeah. So, you referenced the tri-board meeting.
Yeah.
For everyone. So, actually, I don't know the origins of the tri-board meeting, but my understanding of why we have one is that all three boards are involved by charter in the budget process, and the Board of Finance is the board that will evaluate the budgets passed by the other two boards and then determine whether to send it to referendum. And so we start the process each year by a meeting in which the board that's going to have that final evaluative authority notifies the other boards of what we think have to get, or what we think has to get accomplished in order for the budgets to get to referendum.
correct.
So that turns a lot on the fact that the Board of Finance is not simply an advisory board, but actually has authority over the budget. So, that's what makes that's why we have the meeting the way we have it, and that's what makes it effective. Let me just ask you a question, changing topics a little bit, but going back to litigation. I know we've got litigation pending now that involves the Zoning Commission. Have you or the Board of Selectmen not been involved in the oversight of that litigation?
I asked for a meeting with the zoning chair. I think the vice chair came, and our outside counsel, and a meeting ensued. And that was at my request.
Okay.
We would not have ensued had I not requested it, and it probably won't happen again.
And what about the Board of Selectmen? No.
No.
Is there
The
anything-
answer would be no.
Is there anything in the charter that prevents that collaboration, or do you think it's just the zoning commission is unwilling to participate?
I can't say they're unwilling, but again, I reference back to my comments about the word purview and the sense that permeates the town government that people operate within their own purviews.
Well, you did say you thought the meeting wasn't going to happen again. Why do you feel that that's the case?
I was asked not to pursue it.
I don't want to press you on it.
Well, I mean, again, I meant well. I just thought that it would be. I wasn't aware that there was a prohibition to the town manager being included in those discussions, and as I sit here today, I don't believe there is a prohibition, and so I inserted myself into it just to learn more about it and to ask some questions about how the process works, and I came away understanding, and I am reporting to you tonight. That I'm not sure that that's in the best interest of the town, right?
Well, just to be clear, I mean, litigation is a sensitive topic, and we don't necessarily want to go into it here. So,
if I can, though, just to get back to your earlier comment about the role of the Board of Finance and the tri-board meeting, I could give you a reverse example, and that is that, the Board of Selectmen, one of their primary goals is economic development, grand list growth, keeping the mill rate down. All of those things are within the purview and are very important to our colleagues on the Board of Selectmen. And yet they don't have a tri-board meeting with zoning and planning to convey those goals. Their goals are adopted and they're public and they're posted on our website. But I'm not aware that there are formal mechanisms for those charges to be conveyed from our top policy board to the other boards. And I'm not recommending that zoning or planning be changed or combined. It's out of my purview to use that word. But I think we're just, I guess what I'm trying to impart, and apologies for being a little circular about it, but I'm trying to impart this sense that we're missing something by the decentralization in certain situations.
So I've used this analogy before, and forgive me because I think like a business person, because I come from
I do too.
corporate America and not the public sector, and I think what I struggle with is we have staff who are charged with certain goals that may be inconsistent with what the residents in a POCD are saying they want. So because there doesn't seem to be this collaboration sometimes, I look at it as like the CEO and the board of directors, and they have a mission and a vision for a company. So we have a mission and a vision for the town that needs to be communicated to all of the departments and commissions and boards, and everything that we do should be consistent with that mission and vision that is set by the Board of Selectmen, who are elected by the voters. But we've got these pieces of it that are inconsistent with, they don't match, right? So we have a POCD where, I participated in it as well, and one of the most valuable things that we as Simsbury residents feel is open space protection, okay? But then we've got staff who have goals that are tied to grand list growth. Those are in direct opposition to each other, right? So how do we, I'm not commenting on your comments, but I'm hearing your point, but I don't, it seems like a bigger problem as we grow as a community about this conversation.
Yeah.
And are there charters that address these collaborative meetings in other parts of the state, Bob, that speak to this kind of thing, or do they stay away from that conversation?
In the area of planning and zoning, I don't know how many, but there are many towns that reserve the final zoning authority to the legislative body, so that any zone change has to be approved by the town council or the Board of Selectmen. Town of Glastonbury, for instance. And all big projects usually involve some form of a zone change. So the big project gets referred to the legislative body by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the final authority to approve the zone changes with the legislative body. That brings the legislative body, whether it's town council or board of selectmen, into the major project world. And I witnessed many times when the town council will say, we don't like that project, and we're not gonna approve it unless you make the following changes, usually about density and height of buildings and things like that. So that could be done. I mean, you as a Charter Revision Commission could designate the Board of Selectmen as the final zoning authority, such that zone changes and all land area developments or special zoning tools inevitably involve a zone change. That's how they work. So those projects would be referred to the Board of Selectmen for review. Not that they're going to turn down every project or approve every project, but it does give the legislative body the ability to say, we don't think that works. It's too much traffic, it's too much density, it's too much height, or not enough density in some cases. You know, so a lot of times the reverse of too much density is, the old 50s style suburban developments that with a huge parking lot in front and a big old box building in the back. A lot of towns say that we don't want that density. We want you to move it up the road, move it up to the road, street line. But my point is that would be a decision of the legislative body as the final zoning authority, not of the Planning and Zoning Commission. In terms of economic development, lots and lots of towns have an economic development department that works with the planning department to actively generate interest in projects to come to the town, because the planner can't do it. The planner there's a conflict there in my mind between the planning function and the economic development function. And lots of towns like to save money and call the economic development coordinator and the town planner the same person. The town planner is doing his or her job right. The planner isn't an advocate for grand list growth. The planner is a more technical, this project fits the regulations or it doesn't. So lots and lots of towns, and Mark, you work in Hartford, you know this, they have a whole department of economic development that works with the planning department. So those changes could be made. Institutionalize economic development, not just as a commission, but as a staff department that would have the charge of conducting studies, going out and trying to find economic development opportunities. The charter does right now require that all litigation cannot be settled without Board of Selectmen approval. Now, why doesn't that apply to zoning? It doesn't apply to zoning because the current charter gives the Board of Selectmen no role in zoning. So I wasn't at the meeting. We're not the council handling that particular matter, but I'm imagining that council, for that matter, said, hey, if I have a conversation with the town manager, I may blow the attorney-client privilege because my client is the zoning commission. And whenever a third party with no interest in the litigation meets with an attorney and hears subject matter that should be covered by the attorney-client privilege, and somebody finds out about it, they could destroy the attorney-client privilege, and once the town manager learns what that information was, everyone else is it's available to everyone else. I'm thinking that was what the concern was.
I'm glad you said that, Bob, because that's what I was hesitating about saying, but that's exactly what happened. So you can imagine your town manager being told that that's attorney-client privilege and we can't discuss it.
Yeah.
And that's not that those words were used, but essentially that made me wrinkle.
Right.
It doesn't feel right because would I guess, Bob, the question is, would the Board of Selectmen have been told that if the first selectman was sitting there too?
Absolutely.
See, and that's not right. It's just not right. The Board of Selectmen is our chief policy board, and that's just. I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think this to your point, Chair, the residents have made their preferences clear through big documents like our POCD, which I consider a brilliant piece of work, quite frankly. I know our Board of Selectmen admire it and know it thoroughly.
And they do approve it.
And they do approve it, right? But to vest that in a silo and decentralize some of the biggest decisions that have the longest potential impact on our taxpayers just didn't sit right with me.
Let me just clear this up. So this lawsuit, which is pending now,
It's a zoning appeal.
a settlement would require the approval of the Board of Selectmen, or it would not?
It would not.
No.
Remember early on when we were talking about preemption in matters of strictly local concern versus statewide concern? Zoning, planning and zoning under Title VIII is considered a matter of statewide concern. Therefore, the charter requirement that lawsuits be approved by, settlement of lawsuits be approved by the Board of Selectmen doesn't apply to zoning matters because the state law preempts the local charter for that subject matter.
But the state law, well, we can get into this in greater detail later, and I think we should, because this is obviously an issue we should address.
Now, just let me say one more thing. If the Board of Selectmen had zoning authority, then the charter provision would apply to settlement of zoning appeals, which is what this is. This is a zoning.
Right.
So basically, right now, and I'm not talking about any specific lawsuit, and if there was a lawsuit against zoning by developer, the zoning commissioners would be settling a lawsuit potentially, or not settling a lawsuit, or doing whatever they're gonna do that affects our taxes long-term. Whether it's growth or a settlement or it affects our budget. So they're making budgetary decisions right now because the Board of Selectmen have no zoning input.
Well, let me just,
Or do they, because the Board of Selectmen don't have to approve anything, correct?
yes, but before you can settle any zoning appeal, there's a process in statute to settle zoning.
Don't they have to approve a contract?
It requires a hearing in court with the judge, and it also requires a local public not public hearing. It requires that the zoning commission take up the settlement in open session, review it, and then it has to go to court for open court session. So there is an opportunity, there's always an opportunity for the Board of Selectmen to say, you know, we hear you're going to settle that zoning appeal, we really don't like how you're settling it. It's not binding, but it's advisory. So there is that. But to put the Board of Selectmen or any legislative body in the middle of that process, the statute does allow for the legislative body to be the final zoning authority. And that would mean that for zone change appeals, not for site plan, or that the Board of Selectmen would have to approve the settlement. That would go directly to address Mark's concern.
But we would need to specify that not only that they have approval authority over zoning settlements, but that they have some sort of affirmative or substantive zoning role.
Just like
So that's a little complicated.
Yeah, just like the Board of Finance is the final fiscal authority, the Board of Selectmen could be the final fiscal authority too,
No,
but
Mark made another point earlier about how a settlement could involve, say, expenditures or tax expenditures of the town, which would have to be approved by the Board of Selectmen. So how would that work? If, for example, the plaintiff, in the case of the developer, said, well, I'm willing to make this accommodation in exchange for a tax abatement.
yeah, in that case, the settlement agreement would be subject to Board of Selectmen approval. Tax abatement would have to go to the Board of Selectmen. Anything to do with abating taxes.
I think the issue though
Your
is
point is that you want to bring that into the process early.
zoning wouldn't necessarily, and I'm not talking about anybody in particular again, but zoning wouldn't necessarily think about, oh, there's an opportunity to do this, let me go bring it to the Board of Selectmen. You know, that was why I called and asked for that meeting. Is there something that could be done to get the developer to change the plan to a plan that zoning would like? So again, it wasn't meant to do an end run around zoning. It was meant to get us to where zoning wants us to be, I think, or that was my thinking at the time.
Yeah, it's really not appropriate for a zoning commission or a planning commission to exact concessions from the applicant. It's called an exaction. It's like, well, we'll approve your project if you build us a school.
Soccer field.
Soccer field or something like that, something unrelated to them. But an economic development department should handle that sort of proposal and bring it to the zoning commission.
So you've been the town attorney long enough, and I was on.
That's what many people say.
Well, no, I mean, that wasn't a
I
period.
try hard not to say that, Chair.
To remember, I was on the Economic Development Commission eons ago, when there was an economic development fund that was funded each year in the budget, that was money for things like tax abatements and sewer abatements and things like that. So that was, even though there was this fund that, I don't know how it got funded and how it got administered. My question is, like, was the EDC was never responsible for administering it. Zoning didn't have the purview to allocate those funds. Like,
Yeah, there's a tax abatement policy that goes back some years.
yeah,
Yeah.
decades.
Maybe it's that. We have done tax abatements for EBs.
Yeah, we have 3 of them.
Yeah.
The other one,
A couple of EBs.
yeah, on the corner there.
There's a committee which may not have even made it into Franklin's list called the Business Development Committee that is vested under that policy with approving tax abatements. Why it wasn't the EDC all those years ago, I don't know, Chair. It's on my desk. I'm looking at that. Obviously, the use of abatements is in the old days abatements were misused, and so there's a wide accurate perception that they are not a good tool. Used strategically, they could be, but when I say that, used to incent a developer to shift from this plan to that plan. The reason the developer doesn't want to do it is because the rate of return is just not there. They say we're not going to put mixed use, we're not going to put retail on the bottom. It's all it's all we could do to get them to put 10,000 square feet of a restaurant in or something, whatever. So those what I call strategic uses of abatements to prevent us from potentially getting a development that we don't want, and I could maybe name one. It is a good strategic use of them, because the alternative could be an 830G application or something where we have very little local control over what happens in our town. And to your point, Chair, I think, and one of the things I know this commission is very concerned with, and our Board of Selectmen is as well, is the character of the town. You mentioned open space. I'll just address that really quickly because, of course, the elephant in the room was that I pushed the sale of a small sliver lot of vacant town space. I just want to be clear for the record that open space is a priority for everybody on the staff and our town leaders. It's been well conveyed. The definition of open space has not been well conveyed, and a local ordinance that was passed a dozen years ago doesn't even define it. And my recommendation has been, I'll just say publicly, that we amend that to fix the mistake. The fact of the matter is that as council has educated me, the best way to protect open space is to deed restrict each individual parcel, or at the very least to define open space by local ordinance and attach a list of designated properties, which wasn't done 12 years ago, and hence the debate that we saw unfold recently. But to your point, Chair, and I want to mention this, even though it wasn't in my comments, because I did watch a couple of the meetings of the commission where this came up. In fact, let me just wrap up by just getting to those notes. A couple of things. One was that the organization chart, and this is off topic, but the org chart of department heads, prior to my becoming town manager, the deputy town manager oversaw a couple of departments, a couple of the smaller departments. This issue came up recently, and the comment was made, I think, by one of our Board of Selectmen members that they didn't even know that till recently. So it was the first town manager, Maria, who implemented that. It was then maintained by our interim town manager, Lee Erdman, and when I became town manager, I didn't change it either. And so my deputy handles a couple of small departments, and that is a delegation of my authority to my deputy, who then brings to me any issues that need to be brought to me. So and I think one of the members of the commission rightly assumed that was what was happening, and so I just wanted to confirm that. The second thing, and in no particular order here, is that I have great respect for the Board of Selectmen and for all electeds and for the structure of town government as it exists now. I did my homework before I got here. And I just want to take a minute to talk about the difference between two forms of government specifically. One is the current model, town manager, and the other is a town administrator. What exactly is the difference between Canton's model, which is a town administrator, and Simsbury's model, which is a town manager? And different town managers and town administrators will give you different answers here, but I'm going to give you my answer. The answer is innovation. The answer is some degree, a small sliver, call it 5%, of autonomy and independent thought. And two, the elephant in the room, communication between a town manager and the Board of Selectmen. That is a two-way street, as communication is with all bodies. And for my part, I have worked very hard over the last year to include and engage and collaborate with the Board of Selectmen, and I want to give you a few examples of that tonight. We entered into multi-year memoranda of understanding with a number of stakeholders in the community. One is the Performing Arts Center. We entered into a new, I think it's a 20-year license agreement for the property down at the Meadows. And as we negotiated that, I was assisted in the negotiations by two members of the Board of Selectmen, Select Person Yaisley and Select Person Beal. Simultaneous to that, we were negotiating a multi-year and hundreds of thousands of dollars commitment and engagement with the SVAA, the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association, because it had been decided by the Board of Selectmen that we needed to do what we could to fund a second ambulance. And SVAA had presented at the first tri-board meeting about certain financial realities that affected our volunteer ambulances authorities' ability financially to fund that second response unit. And so I was tasked, and it's in one of the goals that the Board of Selectmen set for me as town manager, to negotiate a new 3-year, they didn't say 3-year, but a multi-year deal with SVAA. I invited two members of the Board of Selectmen to join me, and they were present in all of the negotiations for that. That was First Selectman Wendy Maxtudis and I believe Selectman Curtis Looney. At the same time, I was charged in my goals, and again, those goals set by the Board of Selectmen to the town manager every year or potentially every 2 years, we're not quite sure on that, to also do something similar with Main Street Partnership. And as a town attorney reference, we don't have an economic development department. Essentially, the town has outsourced that work to Main Street for many years. And that's been a long time fee of approximately $50,000. And I was charged, and it was in my goals to get that sorted out, get an action plan with them. And I included two members of the Board of Selectmen in every negotiation, and they were part of that. And that was Selectman Antonio and Select Person Heather Getz. By doing that and by collaborating with the Board of Selectmen, when it came time to bring the memoranda to the Board of Selectmen for approval, it sailed through a lot easier. The champions for the memoranda were the two board members that worked with me to do it. So I am no stranger to collaboration. One of the issues that came up, I think it was raised in the commission meeting, was surprised by commission members that the Board of Selectmen wasn't more intimately engaged in collective bargaining. And I just want to address that as my closing remark. Collective bargaining, in my view, is separate and apart from the type of everyday, run-of-the-mill, they gave me the goals, I'm keeping you informed every step of the way, and we're working together. Collective bargaining, in the bargaining room, the union has their representatives, management has their representatives, and we hammer it out, sometimes for months, and then we bring it to the Board of Selectmen for approval. Now, it is true that we always seek guidance with respect to what are the mins and maxes of what we can afford to pay, right? Are you going to give them a raise of X percent or Y percent? And so those discussions can always ensue. But my experience in the public sector has been that collective bargaining is dealt with slightly differently. It's more of a confidential back and forth until it's ready to go to the Board of Selectmen. And the problem with collective bargaining, and I had this issue in Poughkeepsie, and I was a union president in Hartford, so I've been on both sides of the negotiating table. And the problem is, I think, for the electeds is that they want to be a part of the process, and they're not. And they also want to be able to have line item veto. So if you give them a tentative agreement that's 5 pages of 20 different things, they say, well, we like these 6, but we don't like that one. Well, if you pull at that string, the whole deal falls apart. And so what unfortunately, on this side of the table, I have to inform my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen that you don't get, unfortunately, as much as you want it, line item veto. When we come to you with a tentative agreement, your choices are either approve it or deny it. Now, I don't set that rule. It's an unfortunate thing to have to say to my elected colleagues because it doesn't go over very well in my experience. I have many issues on this in other communities. It's not unique to Simsbury. So I just wanted to explain that to the commission and let you understand and question me if you had any questions on it. That those examples I gave you, and there's a dozen others, but with respect to union negotiations, I treat it confidentially until it's ready to go.
Madam Chair, just 2 points of clarification. The Business Development Committee that Manager Nelson mentioned is in that master sheet.
Okay.
And the facility operation agreement with the Simsbury Performing Arts Center is 15 years, not 20. Sorry.
Thank you for that.
I could have told you that.
You could have told me that.
I had to approve that.
You had
But
to
thank
approve
you.
And Chair, thank you again, and happy to take any final questions.
I have 3 questions.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. Well, 3 comments?
I think you're gonna be here a while.
I'm sorry.
So Mark,
I got a Starbucks pull.
So have you reviewed in section 502 what the duties of the town manager are, and are there anything in that section that are inconsistent with what you are currently doing as far as your responsibilities, or are there any additions that you feel need to be added? Do you think the Economic Development Commission should be removed from the charter and become a policy decision of the Board of Selectmen? And there's been talk with the Board of Selectmen of changing the terms to 4 years instead of 2 years, and if you have an opinion on that.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Just really
I probably already forgot the first one.
I'm sorry.
Let me do the second one. I concur with some of the comments that you've received from Board of Selectmen members about the 4-year term, and I'll tell you why. I think it was Selectman Antonio who said that, the first year is just getting up to speed. Interestingly, my office is going to work, hopefully once we get some other reports done on a nice, package of that you could maybe welcome your new Board of Selectmen with and just give them something, because there isn't anything that kind of informs a new Board of Selectmen, and we concur that there needs to be something. But that's just something we'd like to get done if time permits. So I think the 4-year term is better for continuity. So many things in particularly in local government are taking longer than they used to, and it's just more complicated. And the continuity of a board is, I think, important. So the 4 years would be preferential for me. I think I also saw some comments you received about whether the term should be staggered or potentially wipe out the whole board, and I personally recommend staggered terms. So you don't have a potential for a great brain drain, Or I will say, a slate that, maybe puts itself together politically for one sole purpose and takes over a board. I've seen that happen around the country, and we live in challenging times, right? So a staggered term of 4 years would be my preference. With respect to the EDC, town attorney and I have talked about the economic development. I think Simsbury is in a tight spot. We're not really big enough to have an economic development department. I can see I would not, if I sought budgetary approval for that, I'm not going to get it in the near term. It's just the reality when you have 0.6 grand list growth, and I concur with Bert and his colleagues on that. So I think it would be a non-starter. In the absence of an internal solution, I think the EDC is important, and I would not disband them. With that said, one of the I don't know if it made it into my goals, but certainly the first selectman briefed me on the EDC when I first became town manager, and I was aware that the EDC had not met for some time, and in fact, just after I got here, I think we got some new appointments on the EDC that the Board of Selectmen did, a new chair, Charmaine Seavey, and a new vice chair, who are by all accounts doing a good job. So I think in the absence of an economic development department, we need the EDC. But I will say this, if you're going to rely on a volunteer board to implement and do things to stimulate economic development in the town of Simsbury, I say this to my Board of Selectmen colleagues and to my friends on the Board of Finance. Please fund it. Please give us some level of funding for that. It's not a zero-sum game. If the town manager's proposed budget says we need 10 or 15,000, some de minimis amount, for Economic Development Commission to implement something, whatever it is, I'd ask my colleagues to please approve that funding.
Do you think the EDC should live in the charter or should live outside of the charter?
I believe it should live in the
Should
charter.
be in the code.
It should live in the charter.
Okay.
Yeah. Until such time as we can provide for an economic development. And the town attorney will correct me if I'm wrong, but this idea that we can only change the charter every 7 years isn't right either. It has to be reviewed every 7 years, but it could be done. Could be done sooner. So what I would say is that economic development is important. The Board of Selectmen have said it's a priority goal. It should remain in the charter until such time as we can afford an economic development department, at which case you could consider disbanding. And what was your first question, Chair? That seems like...
Section 502, where it says the duties of the town, your job.
I am totally familiar with that. And there's absolutely no changes to that. You're probably all relieved to hear this, but, what I try to check all the boxes on the things that are my responsibility. Let me just turn that question on its head. The Board of Selectmen has a tremendous amount of authority, and any indication that you've heard through the grapevine or even directly that there's a balance of power or any of this. No, every contract goes to the Board of Selectmen. Every collective bargaining agreement goes to the Board of Selectmen. Every nickel that government spends is approved in the budget that goes to the Board of Selectmen. I brief the Board of Selectmen on everything I can all the time, and I keep just a few things that are long-term, innovative strategies that we're working on in my back pocket until they're ready for prime time. And that's sometimes a little frustrating for colleagues as well. I think, just back to the issue of the town administrator that I touched on, Chair. A town administrator serves at the pleasure and directly under the first selectman. The first selectman directs day-to-day activity of the town administrator, but not of the town manager. The town manager form of government policy is set by the board, and the first selectman is one member of the board, but not the boss, to use that word, directly of the town manager. So somebody here, I know I was watching one of the meetings, I forget which commission members correctly noted this, but if you set my goals every year, or every 2 years, and you give me 35 goals. And one of those goals is we want to see $3 million in efficiencies. Well, I can tell you how I interpret that. I can either find $3 million more in revenue, or I can cut and save $3 million in expenses, or some combination of the two. But that goal is the policy. It is the direction to the town manager, and it sets me on a path of implementing and looking to do things that will cut costs or find new sources of revenue. And here's my point. Both of those require Board of Selectmen approval in order to implement them. So I'm going to go follow that goal. I'm going to do all of that work, and then when it's ready, we're going to package that and we're going to give it to the Board of Selectmen. Ultimately, might go to the Board of Finance, for approval. But some of these things take time, and particularly that goal, millions of dollars in savings. I will just say that if anybody thinks that we can achieve that in 1 year, I don't think we can. If you think we can achieve that without having labor at the table, I don't think we can. If you think you can achieve it by cutting a few thousand here, 100,000 there, I don't think we can. We have to be innovative, and we've got to rethink what we're doing. And my point that I'll leave you with this evening is, with all respect, a town administrator isn't the right person for that responsibility. The town manager has to be vested with some room to operate and come up with the innovative solutions. They need board approval. They may not always need board involvement every step of the way. And I appreciate your thinking about that.
Just a quick one on going back to the zoning issue, and I think you're at the very least hearing some interest in kind of looking at that.
It's a big issue, Jeff.
Process.
I appreciate that.
I think I would encourage, if we were going to go down the road, I would encourage us to look at streamlining that process, right? Because what we keep hearing is how it's a long process in this town. So I think we need to look at the whole process. But anyways, that's really a conversation for another day. It's not my question. The question is that we keep, because of how we're set up in this town, zoning obviously, right, is only half of the shop, half of the equation.
Correct.
I'm assuming if we were going to vest the authority of zoning authority with the Board of Selectmen, you would want the planning authority as well. It seems very inconsistent to have one and not the other, and that could create significant problems, I would think.
Well, who are lawsuits typically brought against? Zoning commissioner, planning commissioner, or inland wetlands commissioner?
I'm thinking even broader than litigation, right?
Land use boards.
Yeah.
I mean, does that get into the, conservation commission and inland wetlands and?
It might, but
I don't
I guess
know,
that's really kind of
DRE or-
my
yeah, I
my
don't know.
question.
Yeah.
If you're just
Well,
setting zoning on that path,
I would.
is that a
I mean, it's a
inconsistency we need to think
I
about?
think, Jeff, I would, and I defer to the town attorney, but I think that I don't want to look, and I don't suggest the commission look for problems that may not exist, but there is a problem that exists, and that is where zoning is the defendant, and other town leaders are not in the room and can't be briefed on that. That's a problem. To your point, I'll defer to the council on some of those bigger
I guess the reason why I asked the question, right, is what, in that scenario, then we are asking the Board of Selectmen to be the final arbiter on just individual applications, let's just say. But
Yes.
they're not in the vision of the town that would dictate those applications. It just seems to be. I just think we really need to think.
Well, Franklin, how hard would it be, you mentioned Glastonbury, how hard would it be to find charters that the Board of Selectmen have zoning approval?
West Hartford and Glastonbury are two I could think of off the top of my head.
Franklin throws his voice.
maybe Bristol.
Already got two down.
There you go. Good work.
I know two of them. All right.
Good job,
And maybe Bristol.
It's hard to find a data source that would give you a list of those.
That would be a one-by-one charter.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And research, which is, of course, I'm happy
I
to
know,
do.
because you love this stuff.
So,
He is enjoying it. I
so if
will
you
say
wanna find
that.
out
As
towns,
long as the spreadsheet's not tiny, Franklin.
that's an inside.
Would you, would you mind expanding that to all New England towns?
So towns with the legislative body as the zoning authority, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah.
If we could get some examples of what their charter looks like, would that be helpful in having this discussion down the road? It's not gonna hurt.
I would suggest.
We can discuss anything.
Yeah.
Well,
I would suggest
Well, but also
looking at websites
we could use.
Yeah.
Start, because there's probably gonna be similarities in language of how you do it.
right. Paul, you wanted to say?
Just one last.
Well, no, I just want the others to have a
one last
chance.
follow-up. The planning commission cannot delegate, the authorities of the planning commission can't be delegated to the legislative body. Because they're basically two things, one is subdivision approvals and, plan of conservation
Plan of
development. And third thing is 8-26 approvals, those are exclusive. It's, planning commission has to, review and produce a so-called report on all, municipal improvements. Like if the town wants to
Capital
buy a
project.
piece of land, it's gotta go to planning and they've gotta issue a report. Doesn't say approve, it says issue a report. And a lot of people think it's, the standard of review is whether or not the proposed improvement is consistent with the plan of conservation and development. So you couldn't put that back in the hands of the legislative body because it would diminish the.
So they just had to do that, right, for the
Yeah.
Simsbury building?
Right, that's right.
Right, okay.
And wetlands is its own agency, but could be combined with zoning. Many towns, Manchester combines wetlands with zoning. So in terms of streamlining things, that's one way they have chosen to do it.
Good.
You're Paul.
Okay,
Uh-oh.
These are the hard questions.
I'm out of time here, Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna get off the subject of this, but first, Mark, I wanna thank you for
Thank
your
you.
year here and the comments around Simsbury.
Thank you.
Simsbury is a great town.
Really
It's
is.
been built over the years, and a lot of it's been because of the structure that Simsbury has in government. Making the change 7 years ago was a big change, okay? But a lot of the things have remained the same and continue to allow Simsbury to be what Simsbury is as a community. But I just want to go through your memo, a couple of things, because I think we're on the same page in a lot of them. And the first one is, I don't think there's a need to roll back the hands of time, okay? I think that
Isn't that a song?
is something we need to keep going with. I do think there are some shifts in practices and protocols that need to be addressed in specific areas. And I think that it needs to be fine-tuned or tweaked, okay? I think you and I have chatted about this, and there's a need to have a fine-tuning, but not a need to blow things up, all right? And yes, we do have a hybrid model, and I think that's, something that has probably worked well for us in a lot of ways, given that we also need to do some tweaks. However, there is, as we've heard from a lot of the testimony of people, there's murky areas, all right? Regarding, some of it's regarding respective roles, which you have pointed out. As well as you've mentioned a lack of clarity, which a lot of people have talked about, a lack of clarity. So I think we're going to have to address that. Regarding, I'm just going to take your memo here and go through it, and then I'll hit a couple of other things. Regarding the personnel subcommittee, there has been a number of people who have spoken that the personnel subcommittee should stay intact, that it needs to be there as a way of working with the town manager to help provide some of the oversight regarding personnel. You may agree with it, you may not agree with it, but we also need to address the HR manager role, which Kevin Beal mentioned in that you referenced that regarding the new Department of Human Resources. I don't recall him mentioning eliminating the personnel subcommittee, however,
He did not.
in that. So we'll have to address that. Regarding the annual budget referendum and minimum turnout, I agree totally with you on that. And I think the last charter revision, we had a discussion
You did.
around that.
You did.
But we just couldn't get over that hump. I think it's a very good idea that if you get such a minimum amount, maybe 9's the right number, maybe it's 8, maybe it's 10, that all the work that the boards and commissions have done shouldn't be thrown out the window. And you shouldn't have to go through referendum after referendum. And sometimes you might even find that you got 9, but this time you only get 8. What do? You go to it again? So I agree with that. Regarding the grant applications, I think that needs to be streamlined. You need to find some way of that. You also need, with respect to that, I think you have to clarify the emergency powers section, because the emergency power section that I see, it is too confusing. It doesn't give the first selectman the ability to immediately have some say on emergency powers and emergency grants. Wendy mentioned that regarding the microburst, and that there was confusion and some time issues, and I'm still not sure whether we received any grant money on that, but we don't need to discuss that. So I think that has to be addressed along with the emergency power section, both for the first selectman and for the town manager with respect to the grants. With respect to the town policy boards, I think there needs to be some clarification there, but I don't think those boards need to become advisory, particularly around the police commission, the zoning, planning, Board of Finance. We heard over and over again, Board of Finance should be the budget-making authority and not become advisory or not become eliminated or become the personnel be selected by the town council. I think you were an advocate of that early on. And I think if you recognize, particularly the Board of Finance, that the Board of Selectmen is only about 25% of the budget. And the Board of Finance acts as the budget-making authority, which is elected by the voters to oversee everything, and general statute allows them to be the budget-making authority unless charter supersedes that. But I haven't heard anything regarding doing that. I do want to go back a little bit to your comment that you made just a moment ago, that and I'm paraphrasing, so help me if I'm wrong here, okay? Okay, that the town manager, the first selectman, is not the boss of the town manager, okay? And if that's the case, then is it the Board of Selectmen that is?
Correct.
Okay, so if that's the case, then we've heard from a couple of people that means that the town manager has 6 people who as the boss. So in effect, the town manager has no boss. And one of the things that we've heard from a number of people is around that the town manager has too much authority, and that needs to be addressed either by giving the first selectman the ability to be the chief executive officer, and that the town manager, keeping the title, again, I don't think we need to change that. In section 501, the town manager is currently listed as the chief executive and administrative official. And I think a way of addressing some of the many concerns that we've heard from people, including past town officials, is to make the first selectman the chief executive officer and the town manager the chief administrative officer. Now, that doesn't diminish the roles of the town manager. It clarifies some of the things. There are a couple of other things here that you mentioned Canton, and there are other towns where the town manager is the chief administrative officer. And I think that doesn't diminish what you talked about as far as strategy goes. I think that helps. There's some other language here that I think we could strengthen a little bit, in that the town manager shall be directly responsible to the first selectman, and you could also add, and the board of selectmen. So there are some little things here that I think could be used to clarify some of the many issues that we had. And I don't want to get into this, but I did spend a little time going through every one of the testimonies that we heard around issues. So I was trying to get them into just what are some of the issues. Clarification, authority, responsibility, without, again, blowing it up, all right? So that's really what I wanted to just go over. I think I did that in about 8 minutes, okay? So,
all you get.
so I want to let the other members have a chance to talk about that, so.
I appreciate the positive feedback and actually totally agree with 95% of what you just said. And if, correct me if I'm wrong, you were a part of the Charter Commission last time.
I was.
So,
And you and I talked about this when I met in your office.
Yeah.
I was not in favor of the town manager, but I was in favor of making changes that brought in professional management.
right.
Which I think is very important given the complexity of not only what as Simsbury has grown, but also what we have to deal with from the state and the federal government and personnel, collective bargaining, unions. You have to deal with all of that, and you need professional management to guide and help the elected officials who have the responsibility to the voters, which I think ultimately is they're the final decision-making authority, is the voters.
Just a couple of quick comments in response so that other commission members have the benefit of my thinking on this. I've tried to read all the comments that you've received on this very important issue, so I think I'm up to speed on this. There is a difference, and a big one, between a town manager and a town administrator. You're shifting the responsibility of the first selectman from a role of being the chair of the body, but only one of 6, and giving him or her direct line of authority over the entire organization. And that is a role, that is a government change. That's blowing up the town manager. In my view, it is blowing up the town manager form of government, and you're moving more akin to a strong mayor council. If it's a strong mayor council, then the town administrator serves at the pleasure of the mayor. And I know, as the former city administrator in Poughkeepsie, I served at the pleasure of the mayor. I was a 9-member council, but I was appointed by the mayor, served at the pleasure of the mayor. The mayor is my boss in that situation. And in fact, 9 members of the council couldn't fire me in that form of government, right? You have a clear boss. Here in the town manager form of government, I beg to differ with you with respect to the comments that this body has received. I think if you were to look for the specifics from other Board of Selectmen members other than the first selectman, you might find some nuances, because really what you're then saying is that the first selectman has authority that the other 5 Board of Selectmen don't have. And currently in this form of government, that isn't the case. What duties does the first selectman have? They're enumerated in the charter, primarily as the individual who controls the agenda of the Board of Selectmen. That's the chief authority of the first selectman. There's no authority on the part of any one board member to direct staff. In fact, the charter's got a provision in it that's very well thought out, and that is to specifically avoid a situation like that. So
I don't mean to interrupt, but that was another issue regarding directing of staff that needs to be addressed. And it was more around being able to get information from staff without having to go to the town manager. So I think we're going to have to address that a little bit.
You're right, and I think you'll sense from me a little bit of pushback, very respectfully, because I think that's a red herring, quite frankly. You can couch that in terms of I just want to get information, but at the same time, there can be directing of staff without the town manager's knowledge. Now, in a town administrator form of government, it's totally fine. And in my role as city administrator in Poughkeepsie, if the mayor went to the Department of Public Works director and said, I want this mattress removed, you better bet that mattress was going to be removed over any of the other priorities. And so I very respectfully...
That's not quite what I heard, though, from people.
I think that there's some middle of the...
We're not going to the mattresses.
Well, but my point, though, is that I think we've got to be careful before we say that eliminating that provision of not directing staff is solely because we want more information to be shared. I think more information needs to be shared, but we also have to protect against, because if you let the first selectman do it, other board of selectmen members might want to do it also. So I do see that as kind of blowing it up, quite frankly, because there's a big...
There was
If I
a
can
comment from the Board of Finance, though.
There was a
where we
comment
said-
about the Board of Finance of that, and
Having
really it
Amy
relates
report
around relates around information that
Right.
allows the elected board to do their job.
Right.
And that was more, so it's more like a little bit of a nuance of clarification that I've happened to see in some other charters. I can't remember it at the moment, but I don't think that'll be something that will circumvent what the town manager has.
Okay.
It related more specifically, I believe, to the Director of Finance providing information on a timely basis to the Board of Finance, so the
That
Board
was-
of Finance can make decisions on
Was that
behalf
one
of
of
the
them?
town for
That
bonding.
was,
And
yes, and this hasn't happened under your administration, but there have been times since I've been on the Board of Finance when we simply couldn't get information that we thought was very important for us to have. So,
I think under state law, the Board of Finance is entitled to every piece of information
Well,
that it
that's
asks
right.
for, and
It's just
there isn't
doesn't-
any argument about it.
but it doesn't always happen. And that's one of the things we wanted to open up.
I saw
But-
some comments of your chair, that the Board of Finance chair, that indicated that perhaps the Board of Finance chair should be inserted into the annual review process of the Board of the department.
The finance
It
director.
would have been
Right.
the
And that's
finance- the
exactly
Board of
what my
Finance itself.
fear is, that doesn't sit with a town manager form of government to suggest that an elected official would somehow be inserted into the annual review process of a department head. I would object to that. I don't think that is in the best interest of the organization. Maybe in...
Would you be okay with it with hiring and firing decisions?
I would be okay with advice and consent, yeah. I think because particularly with the Board of Finance, you've got tremendous subject matter experts there whose opinion is important. But I would not see the authority, for example, as Chair Hefner asked, with respect to salaries or any of that. As you see my position about collective bargaining, managing the personnel of the organization is key to the town manager form of government. That is clearly the administrative role. It's not policy, it's not setting laws, it's not passing local ordinances, it's not legislating, it's running this organization and being responsible to our elected and ultimately to our residents as our elected leaders are. So where you get the most serious pushback, I think, to the comments I've heard from others, is that the administrative role of managing town operations rests with the town manager. And when you're talking about staff, whether it's the finance director or the social services director, allowing the first selectman to do something that the other Board of Select members cannot do, you have elevated the first selectman to the role of strong mayor. And you've I would respectfully say you have diminished the role of the town manager. And I can share my personal opinion that were this presented as a town administrator role, I would not have applied for the job. I see it as completely different.
But it doesn't have to be completely different.
It
In other
does
words,
if
you've said that the role of the first select person is to set the agenda for the meetings, but you've also said that the town manager is responsible to the Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
And, it is somewhat unwieldy. The authority of the Board of Selectmen is, to use a word that you used earlier, decentralized. If the town manager is if the supervisory role is dispersed among 6 people. So why couldn't the first selectman be responsible for directly liaising with the town manager and representing the Board of Selectmen in its relations with the town manager?
Well, one reason is because you've got two-party rule and you have minority representation requirements. I don't know if they're in the charter or in state law, but I guess there would have to be a trust on the part of the Charter Commission and other leaders that a first selectman who is a member of one party and who is caucusing with that party is also sharing all the information with the members of the other party. And I'm not saying that that's not happening. I don't know whether it's happening or not. I know that in a two-party situation, you've got to be able to assure that the same information is going to all 6 Board of Selectmen members, and yet your first selectman is a member of one party or the other.
But
And I'm not sure how you...
What would prevent you as the town manager, for example, to make sure yourself that all the relevant information
The
is
first
going
selectman
to
would.
the
A very clear answer to that question, Bert. The first selectman would, under this form of government, under the town administrator, if the first selectman is my boss and tells me, you shall only communicate through me, if were that to happen, that's the answer to your
Right, but
question.
that's a matter of trust, as you say, but the same matter of trust goes to the relationship between the rest of the town staff and the elected boards, because as I've said, we've had issues with possibly a town manager who has instructed members of the staff not to share information with elected boards.
And I would never do that. I think that's improper.
As I said, it has certainly not happened in your
Right, and
administration, but it has happened.
And the reverse is also true. The current administration of the Board of Selectmen is not overstepping, and then that's not the claim that I'm making. I'm simply looking to clarify that this is not a distinction without a difference. A town manager has some degree of autonomy and is in control of the administrative role of the government and not policy, whereas a town administrator reports to one person, that's the first selectman, and the other 5 therefore have less power. You can't just be concerned with the balance of power between the first selectman and the town manager, and you've heard a lot about that. You've also got to be concerned about the balance of power between the first selectman and the other 5 Board of Selectmen members. And finally, I'd say this is not any different than in the nonprofit sector, where a executive director reports to the full board. There's a liaison with the chair, and certainly if the chair says, this, that, or the other thing, that's going to be the law on a Monday afternoon. But with respect to governance, the governance and the decisions that affect the organization are made by the board of directors, not just by the chair. And we have to be careful not to elevate the chair of the Board of Selectmen. Some of the comments that you've received, actually, to your point, have suggested, at least one I saw, that the Board of Selectmen should elect its own chair. And if you went to a council form of government, that the chair of the council would be elected by the council, right? So you got that comment as well. In that situation, I might be more agreeable, Paul, with what you're saying, because then the council elected the person, and they did it with the full knowledge that under the charter, that's the boss, if you will, of the town manager. But in a situation where they're not electing it, you vested the reporting authority in a first selectman member who is a member of a political party.
Go ahead. Just one final thing on that is the voters should be the ultimate decision maker and have the knowledge that they can go to somebody who is responsible for the town. In this situation with a town manager, it's diffused. Whereas if you have a first selectman who is the chief executive officer, whether it's appointed by the, selected by the Board of Selectmen or elected, they know that that is the person who is responsible for the town. And that they will, with the Board of Selectmen, set the policy, okay, and delegate to the town manager for the administration of those policies. So I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree, but I think there is a way to make sure that that still happens and that the voters get a sense of, who's in charge. All right, and I think you need that sense of authority. Jeff, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I'm good. Actually, I'm good.
Just trying to clarify, accountability and communication. It wasn't so much someone to be in charge, but that's, as you said several times, having 6 people to have to communicate to or getting communications from can be difficult.
I think the relationship amongst and between the Board of Selectmen members, and I don't mean this board, but in general, think 10 years from now or 5 years from now, that's a pretty weighty thing to think about in my view in today's world. And be careful, I would say, just in my 30 years of experience, in assuming that a person elected to the role of first selectman is in fact going to be the individual that can share that information. If to Bert's point, the claim is that previously information wasn't shared by a town manager. It's just a part of the human condition that might just as well have been true of a first selectman as it might have been of a town manager. I can remember when I interviewed for this position by the prior board, I was asked a couple of very interesting questions about the relationship between the first selectman and the town manager. And of course, that board was the former board. And they knew my background as coming from a strong mayor form of government, and in fact was a mayor myself. So they questioned me on that, 2 or 3 questions. And I want to share with you tonight what my answers were, as best as I can recall. I said, these issues that you're raising, I was familiar with them from news reports and from my own due diligence, are really just a function of communication. And where the respective roles have mutual respect and lines of communication are open, there needs to be some confidence that people can do their jobs. And that was my answer in the interview process, and it's my answer today. I'm not going to always agree with the first selectman or any other board, but the board sets policy. And 4 votes of the board is a direction to me, and it will be followed. But is it fair to the other 5 members of the Board of Selectmen, under our current form of government, if the first selectman were to direct staff or to direct the town manager? The issue came up at a Board of Selectmen meeting about 2 or 3 months ago, and I think it was Selectman Beal who said the role of the Board of Selectmen is to hire, review, set salaries, set policy, and set goals for the town manager, not to get into the weeds on individual things on a day-to-day basis. And with me there, it was open session. He said, we hire you, we fire you, we set your compensation, we set all the policy, we pass all the local laws, and yet the comment you've gotten from some constituents is that the town manager has too much power. No, I'm not sure I would say that, and nor am I seeking it. So let me set that record straight. Don't want any more authority. Just want to be able to operate in the system of government that existed when you hired me, and want to continue to serve the residents of Simsbury. So
Given that this arrangement is relatively new,
yes,
a lot of what you probably are doing is educating the Board of Selectmen as how this works.
Yeah.
So what's the most important thing that you do when you engage with the Board of Selectmen? And particularly, let's just take the example of the collective bargaining agreement, where you went, that you did what you needed to do. And it probably came as a surprise because that's probably the first time they've seen something like that.
Correct.
So what's your strategy in dealing with something like that so that it doesn't get confused with what's in the charter?
Great question. Really, really good question. And I think I've got more than one answer, and I'll try to be brief because I know you guys think I'm not.
There's still other 3 things on the agenda.
Okay.
Don't worry, we usually go till 9:30. We got plenty of time.
Franklin's serving dessert soon.
Yeah.
I want to be very candid about the first part of this answer because I think, and I pride myself on thinking strategically. If I know that there's going to be some issues like this where they may not know and I may need to educate them and there may be some friction and I'm not maybe good at that, I'm going to compensate by doing what I can in other areas to offset that. So, for example, knowing that I'm not able to include them in many of the aspects of collective bargaining that they might want to be included in, I'm going to make absolutely sure that I include them in as many other things as possible so that when I am held to account and my annual review is tomorrow, just coincidentally, right after I'm invited to speak to the Charter Revision Commission.
That was
the
not
board is
intentional.
it was, no, I'm sure. But I think the point is that when the comment is made, and it may be tomorrow, that, well, you need to do a better job of this or that or communicating, I have a whole slew of things that I can point to and say, no, that's not true. That's part of the answer. The other thing is that you're right, and I think we'd love to, in the town manager's office, create a document for new Board of Selectmen members that was an unbiased, impartial, reviewed by the town attorney and others. And hey, welcome to your new role, because they don't know, and I think it's up to me to inform them. It's difficult to do that if they have expectations, and so I will share the last part of my answer, which is I have heard very often that, and I want to get this right, that's not the way it's been done in the past. I've been told that often. And yet the form of government just changed. And yet there is a widely held belief that there were deficiencies with prior administrations and particularly relationships with boards, and we've heard about a lack of communication and sharing information. Whether it's true or not, I don't comment. But I do say that against that backdrop of unhappiness, I'm surprised at the number of times I hear that's not the way it was done. We have a new form of government, and so some things are done differently. And I got to just say one other thing to my colleague Burden and my friends on the Board of Finance. And I've said this to the first selectman, so I'm not sharing anything I wouldn't say directly to anybody. The annual budget process under my leadership is not just about the line items and the individual dollars and cents, that two-dimensional view of budgets. It's more strategic. And what I'm trying to do and educate and work collaboratively with particularly the Board of Selectmen is to take a wider view, 100,000-foot view of budgets. In every budget cycle, we go through everything. But we also have one or two fundamental points of conversation that I want to educate them on. That may frustrate some, but those are important discussions. I'll give you some examples. The appropriate use of reserves in situations where you have no grand list growth and potential large mill rate increases is something the Board of Selectmen needs to consider as it reviews the budget, right? Those things may be viewed as within the purview of the Board of Finance, but the Board of Selectmen also should look at that. Also, I think efficiencies in the budget process are things that I've tried to educate the Board of Selectmen on, that when they say this is the way we've done it, I say, yes, that's the way you did it under the first Selectman form of government. And I want to give you a specific example. in the budget every year, there's a section called outside agency requests. That is requests for funding from external partners. And historically, in the first selectman form of government, those requests went right to the Board of Selectmen. They didn't go to the town manager for consideration. But when you change to a town manager form of government, you vested the town manager in the budget process. And so, for example, this year, I had to submit the town manager's budget to the Board of Selectmen by February 10th, and we did that. What do I do with the outside agency requests? They've always been, handled directly by the Board of Selectmen, and I don't really know. I took the position that the budget is my budget, and therefore the outside agencies need to submit to the town manager their requests. I think there were those on the Board of Selectmen that might disagree with that they want to be specifically involved in the outside agency requests part of the budget. So I've tried to educate them that even though I put them in the budget or I don't put them in the budget, the Board of Selectmen can add them or the Board of Selectmen can delete them. What the Board of Selectmen can't do is carve out a piece of the budget and say, that's ours. You don't get to submit any of that in your town management budget, because that's not what the charter says. So that's just one example of where I've tried to educate them that, for example, if a board or commission wants funding authority, like the EDC, the process that you've built is that the preliminary budget is built by the town manager. So the EDC would come to the town manager. And that creates some potential for friction because the charter says the EDC is advisory to the Board of Selectmen and essentially reports to the Board of Selectmen and follows the guidance and direction of the Board of Selectmen. I hope that answers your question. I'm an advocate for funding, giving the EDC some funding, enough said on that.
How does the education process go?
It's been going very well, and I will say that Franklin giggles because we have this conversation. I want to thank every member of the Board of Selectmen who's worked with me for the last 13 months because they've all been very accessible. They've all been very willing to engage in conversations, and some of them have been really wonderful, almost debate style, back and forth, where we really get to the nitty-gritty, and whether we always agree or not is not really the issue. The issue is that we're having some, I think, probably more than my predecessors, and I was good friends with Lee Erdman, so he knows I don't mean this in any disrespect to Lee, but I think I'm having the types of conversations with our elected boards and leaders that we need to have, and that they're vibrant. They result in a meeting of the minds 99% of the time. I think that's local government at its best. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, in fact, some friction, some disagreement, it just makes it so much more important to work together. And that's what I hope we're doing. We've passed unanimously 2 really good budgets. And this one that is going to public hearing on April 8th is one we're particularly proud of, not because it has great things in it, but because everybody worked collaboratively, all 3 boards. I was just congratulating Jeff and the Board of Education for their work in so significantly cutting our CIP to the guidance from our colleagues at the Board of Finance. And ultimately, it was the Board of Selectmen that did that. So there's lots of examples of where we're working together, and the results are exactly what they should be. And I don't see any reason to change that just because some people say that one side has more power than the other. I think part of the issue, as I alluded to earlier, was maybe members of the Board of Selectmen don't understand or don't fully understand how much authority they have. I've sat here in front of you tonight advocating for them to have more. Right? I'm advocating for us to elevate the Board of Selectmen, not for you to give more power to the town manager. But the town manager needs to have some autonomy, particularly with respect to the administrative running of the day-to-day operation, and that was my view.
Assume you win $1 million and move to the Bahamas, and we have to find another town manager.
I don't think I would leave if I did win the $1 million. But,
and you decide that you don't want to be town manager. What's in the charter that makes you nervous about this relationship between the Board of Selectmen and town manager? that needs to be addressed in this charter?
I have no fears at all about it. It is an issue that, any two people, no matter what their roles are, may not always agree. These roles, chief elected and chief executive officer, they must work together. They must respect each other. They must not talk over each other. And listen, our first selectman and I have debates. We don't agree about everything, but I enjoy my conversations, and I enjoy working with all of our electeds. I really do. Your question is another good one. I would say my biggest fear, if I were not here and the town, play this tape in 5 years, it's the lack of authority that's vested in the Board of Selectmen on all the other things, as I talked about, particularly with respect to I won't say threat, but one of the things the community cares most about when you read the POCD is open space and the type of development that we get here. And against that is juxtaposed the need for grand list growth. And that grand list growth is so necessary because without it, our costs are going up by the rate of inflation or more. Our contractuals are going up, and yet our tax base is not going up. That means that you're looking at 4 and 5% a year in tax increases, all things being equal, and we don't want to use reserves. What do? That's a problem. If I was a consultant and you brought me into the town 5 or 10 years from now looking at all the things that are happening, I see some problems there on the development side, on the risk of loss of litigation, frankly, that wasn't settled. Something gets built that we don't want again. And the lack of grand list growth is concerning to me because ultimately, I don't know what we do about that. And I like to think I have a lot of answers. I probably get criticized for thinking I have the answers. I don't have the answers for that. So when I'm asked what scares me, what worries me, it's rising costs that are far outweighing our grand list growth. We've used some, I got to say, and Bert, you know this, last year, bond premium? Really? $1 million in bond premium? That's something that bigger cities would do, and this town never did it. Credit to the Board of Finance for coming up with that. And other things that were done largely by the Board of Finance to close that budget gap. They did something that smoothed our debt service costs that was, I would describe, brilliant. And I credit our finance director for working with them to do that. And that may be, in the weeds a little bit here. This year, my budget cut $380,000 from operating. The Board of Selectmen went on to cut another, whatever it was, $150,000. The Board of Education sharply cut CIP. When you cut capital, you're pushing it to the out years. But it's still roofs of schools. It's still, what are you going to do? So what are we doing? We're trying to increase grant revenue. We're trying to cut expenses. We're trying to think strategically about long-term. This summer, we're convening the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen and probably the Board of Finance, hopefully, with respect to a deeper dive on capital, so we can take a look. I know the Board of Ed is doing its strategic plan. I don't know how often you do that, every 5 years. So,
Right.
Yeah, we need to, yeah.
Okay. So those are the answers to those questions, and I think that they're very good ones. And thank you for
Great.
that.
Well, thank you for your time and your
Thanks,
comments.
everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Just for a record, we did ask the police commission to present this evening, and they had no comments, so I just want to put that on record, that the police commission didn't have any comments or charter concerns for us, so that will be added to Franklin's spreadsheet that they opted out of, they basically had no comment. Okay.
Did they say why they have no comments?
Franklin ended up having to close.
I thought the charter was fine.
I emailed, basically what Vice Chair Hinault said, I emailed the chair, to the Chair Grant. She said that she communicated with the full police commission and they reviewed their charter section and had no recommendations or edits at this time. And they said that if need be, she can be brought forth to the Charter Revision Commission meeting, but with no comments, she didn't feel it was necessary to attend this meeting.
So, check one off the list. So the next item on the agenda is the town board and commission research that Franklin's been doing, so he's been adding to this list.
Our tiny little chart.
It's bigger.
He got it bigger.
Got
That's
bigger.
Franklin.
Need a smaller magnifying glass.
Right? So,
Nice job.
So the main thing, Madam Chair, just
Yeah.
to say is I added the, as directed from our last meeting, 2024 meetings of all the boards and commissions. As you'll note, some of them did not meet at all, some of them met very frequently. Some boards and commissions only convene to discuss matters that are directly related to them, as in the Fair Rent Commission. Not only was it recently reestablished, it only convenes to discuss matters brought forth to them. That's why they only have met twice. They could meet less times or more. It depends on.
depends on what's brought forth.
Exactly. So some boards and commissions operate like that Hometown Hero Selection
It's an
Committee.
as-needed basis.
As needed, exactly. So that's,
So we appreciate you putting that column in because that's helpful. So thank you for doing that research, because we know you love doing that.
and I also, from the direction of the commission, I don't remember which commissioner, but we wanted to highlight which are Board of Selectmen subcommittees and which are Board of Selectmen temporary committees. There is a distinction. The temporary committees are established every 2 years at the organizational meeting of the board. I've listed those under the column established by charter or code. It says parentheses temporary committee, or if it's just a subcommittee of the main board, it's listed as such.
Right, so when we're discussing the charter, we're gonna be discussing ones that are not on the code, because that's Board of Selectmen policy. So basically, the green is what we're gonna be reviewing. Okay, thank you for including those. I appreciate that.
I know this is not in our purview, but there are some committees here that are not charter, that have not met in 2024.
So I think we asked that question, Bob, of you last time, that we could make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, they review what's in the code, but we are not going to be making a recommendation that we could recommend that they review this particular commission because it's in the code and they haven't met, but it's up to them what they do with it. Because it's a policy thing, not it's a code thing, yeah.
It's an ordinance.
It's an ordinance that they need to either revisit or not, up to them. So, okay. So the next item on the agenda is approving the March 18th, 2025 minutes. Is there any, does anybody have any changes to the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Do you have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Next item on the agenda is planning our agenda for tax day, April 15th. I won't be talking about taxes because I just paid those. Are there any other commissions or committees that we feel we need to hear from before we start getting into the meat of our work of going through the sections of the charter and start the process of,
We're fried.
I think we're ready.
Just wanted to reiterate, Madam Chair, that last meeting you suggested the possibility of the Culture, Parks and Rec
Oh.
Commission and Open Space
Oh,
Committee.
right. I
From the
apologize.
last meeting, those are the only two identified boards and commissions you suggested that could potentially come to.
Forgot that, thank you for reminding us. I mean, do we feel like we need to have them come in, we should give them an opportunity perhaps to present with a 15-minute time limit?
Well, I have a quick question.
No.
I mean, I love this grid, by the way. I think all the Board of Selectmen and everyone should see these clearly. We have a lot of boards, though, that are chartered that have not given us any feedback yet. Is that when you say
We
comments
haven't
received?
asked,
But didn't we ask all the chartered boards just for any feedback? Like any?
any feedback.
None?
Correct. All chartered boards and commissions in green received an email.
Yes.
The chair, just the
Yes.
chair,
Yep.
regarding that the commission and Chair Barnett invites them to submit written comment, and that's it.
So I'd like to propose that maybe we send out another email to those that have not responded to us, saying that their comments are due by April 15th for consideration before we start working on our suggested revisions.
Even if their comments are no comment.
Yeah.
Even if it's no comments,
We have no
we would
changes.
like a reply.
Negative responses required.
we wanna hear from you, so
Yeah.
by our next committee meeting, commission meeting, that we need to hear from them. I think that they've had 2 months to do that, and that should be sufficient.
Good idea.
And then if we don't hear from them, we can skip over that section. No, I'm not saying that, but, you know,
Chair, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Which is, with the Culture Commission, we got the message from Jeff
Yeah.
Dornenberg. Now, that was in the previous Charter Revision Committee to have that commission established. So what do we do with something that's
So
been
that-
recommended in the previous charter report, but is not in the charter? Was
but
it
we
that-
referred that letter from Mark and the various signers of that back to the Board of Selectmen. And the
No.
Board of Select,
No, that I understand.
The last
But if it's
Right.
in the previous Charter Revision Commission, that commission be established, and it's not in the charter, what happened in between?
the Board of Selectmen chose not to include that in the referendum.
You see, we could recommend it again. I mean, it's no reason,
Yeah.
if that's how.
They
that's-
decide not
that's
to
how we
do it.
feel.
They decided
Yeah.
not to do it, and it didn't go forth in the referendum for the town to vote.
Yeah, because I feel like the recommendation was to stop the economic development
Right.
commission as well, but, you know, that continued on with
Right.
their own.
So that after we do our review and we present our report to the Board of Selectmen, they're gonna choose what they're going to vote on. Am I saying this correct? To put forward to referendum for changes.
Some, the whole report, some of the report, or not.
None of the report.
None of the report.
Right.
So Bob, do we, so we give them, what I remember, we give them a draft, right? They say, we like this, we don't like this, they come back to us, we come up with the final, and then it goes to them for approval. They don't make changes to the draft, they come back to us and say, we want you to include this or not include this.
They come back to you and say, we really hate this idea. And then you can say, well, we really love it, and leave it in the report, but it's ultimately up to the Board of Selectmen to decide what goes on to referendum.
But if we really
Is
love
that
something
what-
and they don't really like it, we could provide evidence, like maybe we heard from everybody in public audience said the same thing, and, you know, we could provide, I'm assuming, evidence to them of
Sure.
why
You could
we
try
put
to
it in there,
You could try
right?
to persuade them that it's a really good idea to leave it in, but ultimately, it's up to them.
Right.
Now, the check and balance to all that is there is a petition process, where someone could petition it.
They're an arbiter of what goes to the referendum, but
Yes,
you could
but there's a
petition.
petition process, it's a
Secondary.
very high bar, and it's
Yeah.
likely to happen unless it's something that's really, really important to the public, but.
All stand outside the big
Information, Chair.
Gerald's.
Would it be, and this is a general question that I would solicit the town attorney input, would it be appropriate or maybe even an order instead of a maybe, which is the normal, creating a document, sending it to the BOS, they have comments, send it back. Charter Revision Commission meets, discusses it, sends it back again. Would a meeting between the Board of Selectmen and the Charter Revision Commission be appropriate in order or even allowable if that is an idea that the commission and the chair
Prior
would
to
be-
us issuing the
Yeah,
draft,
it's certainly allowable, I mean, you could invite them, there'd be no obligation to come, but you could invite the Board of Selectmen once you get to the point of a draft report, to have a discussion about, well, we're thinking about this, we're thinking about that. Again, it's not binding, they can say, that's a terrible idea, and, you can still do it.
Bring
Understanding
the
that
town
it's not-
manager to that meeting too.
You could, but the process is draft report, and don't forget, you need to have another public hearing on the draft report.
right,
That's another opportunity to hear from people, but the draft report goes to the board. The board ruminates over it and sends back their recommendation, and then you all decide what makes the final cut into the final draft.
Bob, if I can, is the public hearing with the Charter Revision Commission or with the Board of Selectmen? So the Board of Selectmen doesn't have to have a public hearing,
Public
it's,
hearing,
so
they
there's
do
two?
have to have a public hearing on the.
That's what I
budget.
thought. So there's
We
Once
have
they-
to, we have to have a final public hearing.
right.
Correct.
Right.
And they have to have
And then
one.
they have to have one once we submitted the
And then it
report.
goes to referendum.
And then it goes to
Final
referendum.
product.
Decide what goes to referendum and in what form. Big question, so shall the draft report be approved, or lots of little questions directed to different changes? And that grouping is very, very important.
Did the last time it happened, and Paul, you would know this, was the referendum at a regular election? Or
Yes.
Yes,
So you want to try, I think you want to try to do that because the timing, so you're not paying for a separate referendum. There are 20 grand.
It was at a regular election.
Right, so just keep in mind, I don't know what the timeline,
Well, you really want it to go to the 2026 election, because that's the gubernatorial election. If you send it in 25, don't forget, you got 18 months to choose. If you send it in 25, you're going to the municipal election, and, I mean, you can do it, but the turnout will be much, much lower. It'll be low in the gubernatorial election, too.
well, I think, am I correct? I thought one of the charges from the Board of Selectmen was to try to get this done for this municipal election.
Request, not
Well, that's-
Request.
That's their call.
It's their call.
That's their call.
They decide
We're not gonna rush it, but we love meeting. So next meeting, we wanna, so you're gonna send out an email, Franklin, to the commissions we have not heard from, requesting that their comments be submitted by April 15th for
Now
consideration.
or forever hold your peace.
Or
Right.
say, we have no
But
comment.
those will be written comments,
Yeah.
There'll be written
with
comments.
the exception of the two boards.
We can invite Culture, Parks and Rec and
Open space?
Open Space to do a presentation or provide written comments at our next meeting, and then we can start the process of actually going through the charter,
Let's do
right?
it.
Section by section,
As outlined by our charge.
right.
That's where it gets.
Are we all in agreement on that, or do we wanna do any more than that?
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh.
Again, the charge doesn't limit you, though, if you found something along the way that you
Yeah.
determined to be really
Right.
important.
There's one thing I got from one of the committees, and given that we haven't heard from them, I'm gonna go back and say, oh, by the way, you need to formally send this in. And it's a pretty good one, actually. It relates to non-attendance at board meetings, commissions, non-elected
Yes.
boards, and what to do about that. So I thought it was a pretty good one. I have seen it in other charters, but I'm not gonna bring it up tonight. It's like, it's up to them to send it in and have us review it.
And who's the them?
I
wouldn't say.
I don't need to say right now. Yeah, it just belabor the meeting.
They should file their boards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Move to adjourn.
do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much for all your
thank
time.
you everybody for
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town.
bringing us together through local programming,
Education and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community.
Ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings.
And celebrating milestones.
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions. And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue.
Even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open.
Continues to educate our youth.
And keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive.
For generations to come.
Visit our website.
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
Counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media.
where your town
Your schools
And your government come together.